So we are gathered via Zoom to have another discussion. This time about an exhibition of work by Martin Puryear at Matthew Marks, which we have all been to see, and we gathered there and were filmed looking at the work by Maud Britt, who has organized this Zoom and will eventually edit it. Thank you, Maud. We're here with Jock Ireland, Brant Junsu, Shorkat Karazan, and myself, Garth Evans. So, Martin Puryear is an important, significant artist with a major reputation. Seems to be kind of universally respected and admired, and a sculptor who's forged a very, I think, distinct and unique practice. The exhibition comprises, I think, just 6 sculptures. Each one of which is quite distinct. I mean, they don't follow any formula. I don't know what you guys made of it. I mean, I have enormous respect for Martin Puryear and what he's achieved as a sculptor. His devotion to craft is something that is unique, I think, these days. I came away from the show, what was going through my head was Brancusi infused with narrative. That was my my quick one phrase kind of take on it. Anyway, let's see what anybody else thought.
The Puryear's Happy Jack reminds me of Brancusi's Chief, which actually is quite a narrative Brancusi. They're not alike in form, but there's some similar emotional structure and emotional, kind of twist in the humor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were 2 pieces in the show, Happy Jack, and I think the other piece is called Also Okay, cast in bronze, but originally made in bamboo or something. Happy Jack is a sort of weaving. Martin Puryear, I believe, has worked with traditional craft people in various parts of the globe at different times. I wondered about the casting of those things in bronze and the transformation that occurs, and the extent to which that was part of adding a narrative, that metamorphosis, or whether that was simply a strategic commercial consideration. Hate to say that.
I think in the case of Happy Jack, it's a formal decision. Because casting unified, in form and moreover in time, all the long labor of weaving that thing together was sort of like, he made an instant out of it. It became completely form, and time vanished. Craft vanished in a sense.
Well, other people got involved in the production.
Yeah.
Not unique in Puryear's case. I mean, he doesn't at least as I understand it, he doesn't farm out his work like a minimalist, but
it's one definition of minimalism.
Yeah, I've forgotten where I was going with that now. Yeah, I mean, not just is it become a kind of, you know, a lot of things are erased and a lot of new things introduced, but the kind of sense of the things that occur because of the way the material forces you to work. The kind of certain kind of management, randomness, control of the difficult. You know, there's a kind of a loss of some kind of experiential involvement. As you say, it all becomes, it's all there in the same moment. Wow.
Yeah, I just about the bronze thing. It also allows you to put the piece out on the street in the world in a way that you know, the much more fragile versions it just can't, you know, they can't go out in this cold weather, snowy weather, and last for you know, a reasonable amount of time.
That's true.
You know, as soon as you mention that, Jock, it crosses my mind that it's an interior piece. I mean, it's not impossible to imagine it outdoors, but it seems somehow I don't want it exposed. I feel like the piece is emotionally exposed, emotionally vulnerable. And I just somehow don't want it in the rain. His work has a particular relationship to the floor as well. I think doesn't always translate to outdoors unless it's got a prepared surface.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's this thing that, you know, a whole lot of contemporary sculpture sort of comes out of particularly well-known artists, comes out of their studio and goes directly into a museum.
Right.
And that kind of preciousness is disturbing to me. It just limits the you know, emotional range of the, and of course it limits the audience drastically.
In recent years, he's made a bunch of monumental pieces that I think are, as monumental art, they're quite successful. I mean, there's a lot of big art that goes out in public that doesn't really seem to have considered its place. I haven't seen these things, but my sense is that they succeed quite well.
Yeah, he has. Yeah, he has. And there's a sense in which I think that all of the pieces in this show feel like, in a sense, like kind of public works. I mean, they seem, you know, they don't seem to be purely Martin Puryear talking to himself. They are addressed to an audience, it seems to me. I found the piece in the back room, the wooden piece, which I don't have a title for, I don't know whether anybody else does, the piece that was in the back room on the right as you walked into the gallery. I found that the most engaging for me and the least kind of speaking out, as it were. There's a kind of speaking out quality to the works, I felt. You know, there's a sense in which I felt most of the works had you know, began somewhere with a very clear sense of subject matter.
That's why I love that that last piece so much, because it didn't.
That was my sense too.
Yeah, it seemed to have like all the kind of fraught social conscience of, say, Tabernacle, the Union um, cap piece, without any specific references, and to be formally autonomous, almost as an abstraction, as much imagistic as it and the other pieces are. I thought that I thought that piece was really wonderful.
And I thought the way it invited you to look into it and through it, at head height.
Right. Yeah.
Quite. The piece with the wagon and the toy tractor pulling it, as it were, on a ramp, was clearly, to my mind, the most narrative, the one that was telling a story. Remarkable craft work in that piece. Well, in all the pieces, but in that one, because there's some quite small, delicate work in the constructing this little two-wheel wagon. I found that in some ways, on the one hand intriguing, on the other hand kind of irritating. It seemed to be almost a storybook in itself, and to draw me in at that level, and that was what I kind of found irritating in a way, compared to the piece in the other room, which was just so sublime.
I think some of the objective, the task of those pieces is that they are deliberate irritants. They pose problems that they won't answer, which I think is a really credible method of social sculpture, because we don't have answers.
Yeah, but I mean, and I think that's a wonderful and generous, and in many ways, I think correct rant. But some of the pieces suggest that there are answers, and that you just don't have the wit to get to them, or you don't have the right information. That the answers are in the author's head, and he's not making them available. In other pieces, like the one that we were talking about, it's an enigma, and it's very difficult to find words to discuss it. The one with the wagon is, I said in the gallery, I said, the problem with it is too easy to find words. So, it seems almost descriptive.
Yeah. There's a pedagogic element that runs through much of his work.
Yeah.
Like the wagon piece, what's it called? New Fortrekker, reminds me of a line drawing in a dictionary. Like it kind of plays on self-evidence that, it wants you to see what you see. What you see is what you see, except it doesn't add up. It's like, it's a problem, it's a puzzle, it's a conundrum, it's, an irritant.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it couldn't be plainer, except that you just can't make it add up.
Yeah, I hear you, and I want someone else to get in on this because I'm in danger of starting to argue with you.
I think what you said about the subject matter that was very present in certain works like New Fortraker or some others, and it can be deceiving sometimes because there's this idea of transparency that is very present in his work, and it's something that brings you to the inside. Even in a full and compact work as Happy Jack, you still see it as a container, as a flask, because it really looks like almost like a bottle of a little flask with something inside. So it always brings you to the inside. And with some works more obviously like Aso Okay, which is literally transparent. And Tabernacle is probably the most complex in that aspect, with this game between the inside and the outside, because it really invites you to look to the inside. And I think I first looked at it from the sides and not in the middle, and you see very different things, because on the sides what you see is a almost domestic environment with this canvas, the fabric, the flower flap fabric. I think it's a 19th century French fabric that is all over the place, and I think there's wood inside as well. So it really recreates sort of domestic environment that can be almost cozy and comforting. But if you look from the middle, you see this canon-like structure that I first saw more as an eye, kind of big brother eye that's really looking into you, that can almost absorb you. And it has also a very architectural aspect to it. And speaking of representation, I think Puryear's sculptures have this ambiguity between what's natural and man-made objects. And in a way, he's not representing natural forms, but he represents manufactured objects. He kind of replaced the manufacturing of these objects by stretching the proportions and the scales and makes them more unusual. And I think what you see here, because many of these works were not man-made by him, but kind of the bronze cast the things that he made himself. So there's like a double translation, because he kind of reproduces a man-made object by recreating it, and then it's cast in bronze. So there's like 3 layers of manufacturing in the work that makes them awkward. But in a way, the fact that it's bronze, it clearly makes them more monumental in a more public sense. And I think what Gar said earlier, that these works are probably less intimate than other works and previous works of the artist. They are clearly made for an audience. They have a really public intention, I think.
Yeah, I think, and Brandt hinted at a pedagogical kind of intent to inform, enlighten. At the same time, I mean, they're not at all proselytizing, are they? They're not. There is nothing about them that is kind of remotely kind of propaganda or you know, there is no sense that you are to come to some conclusion in your engagement with them or through your engagement with them. At least I didn't feel that. I mean, in that sense, I think as Brandt in particular was saying, they do seem quite open and open-ended and ambiguous, complicated, complex. Complicated. I mean, I think that's a word that I would like to kind of think about in relation to them, because the pieces like Tabernacle seem to me complicated. Pieces like, what was it you said the title was? Something and aloud?
Yeah. Askew aloft aloud.
Askew aloft aloud didn't feel complicated. It felt complex. It felt,
yeah,
you know, very different in that you didn't have to sort of add it up. You know, it didn't offer itself as a kind of puzzle. either.
I think a lot of them are kind of rebus-like. You could imagine them pulled out to a string of words. They pull out to a kind of a formula, but the formula would be a riddle. It would.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a nice word, riddle. I think they are kind of like riddles in a way.
Yeah, riddle is a nice word, and a riddle is something that is carefully shaped and has a point. I think when you're talking about this complicatedness and stuff, you're getting at a weakness in the work that there's a hesitancy about what he's sort of trying to say, and a sort of confusion, and that bothers me about the work. And this show in particular is I don't know, there's 6 pieces, and the version of the show that we saw was missing a piece that was, or most of the pieces in the show are from an installation at the American Pavilion in the 2019 Venice Biennale. And there was a coherence to, or I get the feeling, I didn't see the show, but there was a coherence to that presentation of the work that is interfered with, or the whole thing. We're not seeing the whole thing at Matthew Marks. We're just seeing parts of it, and I don't know, the directness. I get the feeling that the show in Venice was made sense, had a kind of coherence that is missing from what we're seeing at Matthew Marks. But what we're seeing at Matthew Marks is still interesting, and latching on to the piece that wasn't in Venice, for sure, Askew, Aloft, and Aloud, well, it's interesting to me. I'd like those 2 wooden pieces in the back, and I like them because of the way they were standing, the attention that he gave to the way the pieces met the ground down there, and the sense in that he was working with the wood with a kind of enthusiasm, a physical enthusiasm that was missing from the works in the front room. That was of interest to me. And this, the sort of mental dimension of things, that's where he gets in trouble. That's where he gets in trouble in this show. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't believe any of us have seen the installation in Venice, and I do remember seeing some short film about it, I think. And yes, I think you're probably correct, Jock, in the sense that that was, as it were, the whole story. And what we have at Matthew Marks is not the whole story. But I think story is the appropriate word. I mean, one of the things that was so present in the Matthew Marks show was the way in which each piece was quite distinct and separate. The two pieces that seemed to have some things in common were the two bronze pieces, both of which had been, originally made out of some kind of bamboo or something, and with a weaving technique. But other than that, and I mean, even they were very different. One of the things that was so pointed in a way, I think, was the way in which each piece was its own self and bore very little kind of formal relation to any of the other pieces. I mean, that piece, Hibernian Testosterone on the Wall, that could have been from a completely different world, it seemed to me. And so, whatever the situation was in Venice, I would imagine that again, it was a question of them adding up in some kind of narrative fashion rather than having a formal coherence in the way that the works by Judd at the Museum of Modern Art have share a common language and a common, when they're installed in one room, they begin to make the whole room into a single work. This is a very different
boxes inside of boxes.
Yeah, but when you bring in Judd, that I think that's healthy, but rather than Judd, I'd like to bring in Richard Deacon. But before I bring in Richard Deacon, I'd like to bring in Lydia Gladkova, who just put up a little website. And she's a former studio school student that many of us know, but maybe Brant doesn't know.
No.
But the thing is, she's produced two kind of bodies of work, and each body of work consists of 7 different pieces. And she produced one after working on it for a big number of years. Then she produced a second one that took a little less time. But the issue on her mind is she's asking herself, what am I doing? Am I producing 7 separate pieces, or am I producing one installation? And that issue of how pieces, separate sculptures in one show relate to each other is I think a sort of important issue with the Puryear show, and with Judd. Judd comes from a sort of earlier world where consistency was sort of natural. Deacon sort of interrupted that, and the world we live in now is that kind of consistency is, we're really in this question is, how does the show add up, is a big question, not only for the Puryear show, but in general, it seems to me.
Well, it's not, it's to take a single kind of instance of out of someone's kind of lifetime practice and ask whether that adds up, as we are doing here with Matthew Mark's show, is maybe a bit unfair.
Well, I'm not saying, or I'm not trying to find fault with Puryear.
No.
It's a general.
Well, no, I think the point is that it would seem to me that Puryear comes at his practice from a starting point where there is something that grabs his attention. There is something that he becomes aware of. Usually, I think some historical event or some artifact out of a historical event, and that begins to be the starting point for a work, and each one then evolves. And involves in its own distinctive way. I mean, it's interesting because if I think of the painter, two painters I'm trying to think of, and both names are escaping me now. One British, one American. Anyway, whose work begins with a particular subject and a particular experience, but there is a consistency of style and form, whereas with Puryear, there isn't. I mean, there is in the sense that there is always a kind of an aspiration to some kind of clarity and purity, and that's where the connection, to my mind, of Brancusi comes in. I don't know whether this is relevant or not, but I found myself asking. I mean, I think there is something kind of wonderful and crazy and wonderfully crazy about trying to mash together, trying to infect a kind of Brancusi-ish world with a narrative content, and it seems to me to be a kind of contradiction in terms, and an absurd ambition, and yet in some ways utterly admirable.
As you spoke, I thought of Brancusi as well, that his body of work is taken as this sort of like this philosophical exercise that's wonderfully uniform, consistent, methodical, and orderly. And I think really it's far more episodic and than it's commonly taken. And that back to this oyster metaphor that Puryear seems to start with bits of grit to become the pearl in an oyster. These episodic irritations that generate replies. But I think overall his work has a lot of there's recurrent themes and recurrent forms, and they I actually haven't inspected. I asked myself if they develop over time. I presume they do.
Well, yeah, but I wonder about that. That's an assumption that I'm not prepared to accept.
I'm sorry, you lost me. You wonder about what? What assumption is this?
That his forms develop over time.
But there is there are recurring forms. I think that we can agree on that.
Yeah, they do recur, exactly. But do they develop? Brancusi, it's sort of a more or less straight line. I don't know. And at a certain point, he just had nothing else to do, and Deacon was making terrific stuff in the 80s and 90s, and I don't know, I simply don't know exactly what he's doing now, but what I've seen is that it's less sort of inspired. It doesn't come together in a way that earlier work does. And that kind of thing, Puryear's made some terrific things, but he's not a sort of machine that generates Puryears and generates sort of great sculpture or expensive sculpture with regularity. That's not the way things work. and it seems to me important to look at his work against these other people. You know, to put him beside Brancusi is putting him, you know, in territory that I'm not sure that he can stand up in. But beside Deacon, there, you know, he has something to talk to us about. You know, why do we go to see the Puryear show? Or you know, what can we learn from it? And what can younger people, you know, sort of more importantly, what can young people learn from it? And you know, it's important to look at all the, or it seems to me, all the sort of dimensions of it's you know, he's a terrific sculptor, and it's important to look at him against a Brancusi, but
it wasn't that I was trying to compare the two in you know, as if they were in a race. I mean, it was just that there was a kind of I guess a kind of sense of there being an aspiration in the work that both, you know, through the sense of engagement with craft, a sense of engagement with form, that connected, in my mind, to Brancusi. But then it's not about, it's about something very different. But it's as if, in some way, the language that Brancusi fashioned was there as a kind of, you know, as a kind of syntax, as a kind of grammar, as a kind of structural foundation that was then taken and made use of, and made very different use of. I think you were touching on something there, Jock, that maybe needs to be said, and I would like to say it. I mean, I think one of the most extraordinarily and admirable things about Puryear is the way he has, you know, not become a commercial artist. I mean, you know, his enormous success has not led him to make Martin Puryears. I mean, he makes each sculpture, you know, it makes you feel that he cares about each sculpture, that each one is meaningful, you know, in some way, that is important to him. And it's not, you know, it's not a formula. And I mean, I think that is one of the most kind of impressive, or amongst the most impressive of his achievements. It is very difficult, I think, for a, you know, for an artist who achieves the kind of international acclaim that Puryear has, and the demand for the work, you know, the volume of work that is necessary to meet that, to sustain that kind of level of recognition, and you know, it's very hard to I think for many artists to, you know, to negotiate.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think you can just really feel that he has a relationship with each of his sculptures that is clear. And I would like to go back to what you said about Brancusi. I've thought about this idea of purity that is so important in Brancusi's work. But I believe in Brancusi, it's more of a goal he's trying to reach. And it also translates not only through form, but also how he deals with form by crafting it, and with this everlasting process. I mean, Brancusi's process is a very long one, and the polishing and the repolishing again and again. I have the feeling that with Martin Puryear, purity is not a goal, but more as a point of departure. That's where he comes from. And in a way, I think, although he rejected this minimalistic purity of minimal artists, somehow there's always this nostalgia for purity, but it's more like a nostalgia than a goal. Formally speaking, he's actually trying to do the contrary, to escape it, but it's still there in the inside as a more nostalgic feeling, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's nice. I guess I kind of came away, and the more we talk, the more I'm beginning to feel that the heart of the work is a kind of at the heart of the work there is a kind of conflict, between an aspiration for some kind of elegant and simple clarity, and at the same time a recognition that we live in a very messy, complicated world, and work has to address that as well. There's
Absolutely
towards a kind of spiritual, essence, and on the other hand, a recognition and an attempt to come to terms with the messiness and the horrors of the real world.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Is that it? Have we said it? Is there more?
Yeah. No.
There's
I think what you said is
it's
totally
got a nice
right.
shape to it.